ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this special session in Edgware United Synagogue's Adult Education Programme, just a few days before Holocaust Memorial Day, the time when we remember the 6 million Jews murdered during the Holocaust, alongside the millions of people murdered under Nazi persecution of other groups, and during more recent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur. We're all familiar with some of the leading names of those who rescued Jews during the Holocaust. On Tish B'Av a few years ago, we showed documentaries about Sir Nicholas Winton, and currently there's a film in the cinemas about him entitled One Life. Most of us will have seen the film Schindler's List, about the man who saved 1,200 Jews by employing them in his factories, and there was the Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg and his colleagues who saved as many as 100,000 Jews by providing them with diplomatic passports. But there are many others whose names are less familiar, who also rescued Jews during the Holocaust, and one that stands out is Chiune Sugihara, the Japanese consul general in Kaunas, Lithuania, who in defiance of Japanese policy issued thousands of visas to Jews. Tonight, Gillian Tigner orchudesch will tell us about this remarkable man who has been recognized as a righteous among the nations. Gillian is the director of Torchlight Music, a company involved in television program production activities, and is a journalist, actress, and executive in community affairs. At the end, she has kindly agreed to answer any questions you may have. So over to you, Gillian.
So, I was originally persuaded to give this presentation a few years ago by a man in synagogue who was preparing pre-Kiddush talks. I then presented the talk to the Abraham Debating Society, both in person and online, and this in turn led to more invitations. Each time I tell my tale, I research a little bit further and add a few more details. I hope you find my talk interesting. A Japanese consul, Chiune Sempo Sugihara. I wonder how many of you have heard of him. The first time that my attention was drawn to this gentleman was a few years ago, when a visiting cousin from America told me that I had to read this book he'd just read on the plane about a fascinating Japanese guy. "Gillian, you gotta read this book. It's fascinating." Well, that's not exactly the first time I'd heard about him. Let me go back to the beginning. Chiune Sugihara was born in Yautsu in Japan. It is 100 miles west of Tokyo in the Nagoya prefecture. So they split the country into prefectures, not into counties, and he lived in the Gifu prefecture. He was born on January the 1st, 1900, was the second son, and was of samurai descent on his mother's side. That's as prestigious as being a Cohen or a Levi. And here he is in his samurai uniform. Being born on the 1st of January and on the dawn of a new century, this was regarded as extremely auspicious. At the beginning of the 20th century, the father ruled the household, even more than Victorian fathers had, and there was much respect for parents and elders. Chiune's father decided that his lucky son, born with so much potential, would become a doctor, thereby fulfilling that potential and bringing honor to the family. Chiune grew and began studying, but he found that he did not like the idea of medicine. He loved literature and education and had a flair for languages. He wanted to become a teacher. When the time came, he deliberately failed his entrance exam to medical school by leaving the entire exam blank, except for his name. His father was furious. As with all Japanese fathers, he was used to being honored, respected, and his wishes obeyed. He threw Chiune out of the house and cut off any financial support. It was really unusual for a Japanese child to disobey his father in this manner. This was not how the children were brought up. Remember this independence of character as I continue my story. Chiune was young, inexperienced, used to being the apple of his father's eye, and was suddenly destitute. Down on his luck, he saw an advertisement for the foreign ministry. They were looking for trainees. What luck! He could study what he liked, get paid, and could exploit his love of languages. He studied hard for these exams and passed with flying colours. Chiune was sent to Harbin in China as a trainee for the foreign ministry and specialised in Russian and German. This was particularly unusual as these languages were very difficult for the Japanese tongue, but it was this speciality that determined the rest of his life. In his first job in the foreign ministry, Sugihara was used to broker a highly important deal with the Soviet Union in the 1930s, acquiring the North Manchuria Railroad. This involved Chiune's language skills and brought the Japanese government a lot of money and prestige. The foreign ministry were very pleased with their new trainee. Now, just to tell you a little bit about the Japanese mentality. Keep in mind that Japan had been cut off from the rest of the world for many centuries. Japan was closed to foreigners, and there were very few foreign trade deals. Japanese people, even today, are brought up to suppress their individuality and their desires. They have to conform. They must be obedient to their rulers, their emperors, their elders, and their governments. And through this obedience, they develop the most important characteristic: honour. This is one of the reasons that Japanese treated the British so badly during the Second World War. The Japanese loyally and blindly obey orders. They fight to the death. They did not know how it was possible for a British soldier to surrender, and once captured, those soldiers lost their honour in the eye of the Japanese. Without honour, there is nothing. However, the Japanese did not have a racist mentality. Being cut off from the world, there were no foreigners, no minorities, and consequently no prejudice either. The Japanese did not have racism drummed into them the way the Poles and the Ukrainians had. The Japanese did not understand the concept of anti-Semitism. They just could not see why you should treat a group of people differently because of their religious practices. Later, during World War II, the Japanese did not round up their Jews, nor did they invoke any of the racial laws, despite being on the side of Germany. When I was in Japan, our guide explained that the Japanese follow different paths. On birth and death, they follow the Shinto traditions, yet throughout their lives, they follow Buddha and his teaching. Sugihara himself converted to the Russian Orthodox Church. There is no problem with different religions. So, back to Sugihara. His first marriage did not work out. But in 1935, he met Yukiko. See how beautiful she is. Yukiko was 13 years his junior, and on their first meeting, they joked about how his name, written in calligraphy, could be misread as Sempo. This was to become his nickname. Yukiko was seen as a perfect fit for a diplomat's wife. She was willing to move anywhere with Chiune and wanted to travel. Having honoured his government with the Russian deal, Sugihara was promoted and honoured in return. He had posts in Tokyo and Manchuria. He rose to become vice chief of the foreign ministry in Manchukuo, and then onto the Japanese embassy in Russia and then in Helsinki in 1937. And now we find ourselves in 1939. And having signed the Anti-Comintern Pact back in 1936, Japan is now in a pact with Hitler. The Japanese find that they need an embassy in Lithuania. Lithuania is an independent country on the border of Russia, and the embassy is in the then capital of Kaunas. The capital now is Vilnius, but at that point it was Kaunas. And in all of the Japan's foreign ministry, there is only one Russian speaker. Kaunas was also known as Kovno in that time. It is a provincial city and the embassy is rather run down. But telling Sugihara that this will be a short and easy secondment, the foreign ministry sends Sugihara, his wife Yukoko, accompanied by the sister Setsuko and their 2 sons, to set up the consulate in Kovno in November 1939. So Chiune and family arrive in Kaunas and go about setting up the consulate. Chiune finds a house and gets permission to move in. It is on a hill overlooking the lovely quiet city at 30 Weiganser Street. And this is the happy family outside the embassy. Sugihara, used to being independent and making his mark, tried to get involved in the politics of the time. But he was told that he should stick to his instructions, and anything further was not in his jurisdiction. And, balanced with his innate Japanese obedience, he instead busied himself with his own interests: the consulate, the hiring of staff, his family, his garden. He had been detailed with observing the movement of troops and reporting back to Tokyo. So he took long, leisurely trips in his car, taking the family on picnics, surveying the countryside, and making detailed notes. Meanwhile, the Nazis were expanding across Europe. On September the 1st, 1939, Germany had marched into Poland. The Poles were no match for the German war machine, and within a week or so, the entire country was overrun. There were rumors of castration for all Jewish males. Austria had welcomed Germany with open arms during the Anschluss of 1938. France had collaborated. Holland was overrun. Denmark and Norway were occupied, and in line with German rule, all of Europe was more than happy to hand over its Jews. Europe was on the move, and hundreds of thousands of refugees started running. Sugihara, with time on his hands, went for a walk in town and one day wandered into a luxury food shop selling delicacies of caviar, champagne, and Swiss chocolate. This shop was owned by a Jewish woman, and this lady had a nephew called Solly Ganor. This is Solly much later, and at the time of my story, he is approximately 10-ish. Solly came from a religious Jewish family and had just given all his pocket money to tzedakah to help the poor refugees. But it was Hanukkah time, and he wanted to see the new Laurel and Hardy film. When his father refused to give him any money, he ran to his Aunt Anushka's shop to see if she would give him his Hanukkah geld. Ignoring the Oriental gentleman standing there, he turned to his auntie. Chiune Sugihara smiled indulgently at Solly, recognizing his cheekiness from his own sons. Auntie told him off and told Solly not to be so rude to his elders. So Solly turned and introduced himself. Sugihara asked Solly what it was he was asking his auntie for, about the 8 nights of Hanukkah and how the family traditionally gave their children a little money on these nights. Sugihara was charmed by this precocious little boy. Reaching into his pocket, Sugihara took out a coin and gave it to Solly. "Please accept this gift from me," he said, "as from an uncle." Solly was delighted, and the cheeky little boy immediately invited his new uncle to his house that evening so that he could experience the joys of Hanukkah for himself and could participate in lighting the candles, eating latkes, and listening to the songs and stories. Sugihara and his wife dressed carefully that evening and joined in with loud, bustling, happy family. Yukiko noted in her diary what warm, friendly, and lively people they were. This was Sugihara's first encounter with Jewish people. Back to the Jews of Europe. Although the final solution had not been put into action yet, the Nazis were already rounding up all Jews into ghettos and then concentration camps. They forced the Jews to move into small, inadequate spaces and built huge brick walls around them to segregate them from the rest of the community. The Warsaw Ghetto, for example, was totally surrounded and cramped, with large families used to living in their own apartments suddenly being forced to live in single rooms altogether. At its height, there were 460,000 people living in 3.4 square kilometre space with an average of 9 people to a room. Cramped conditions led to the spread of disease. The ghettos were unsanitary and food was short. Starvation set in and death was rife. Small children became the family breadwinners as they could squeeze through gaps in the wall to get out to the outside and bring food back, and others went through the sewer. One little boy was so starved that as he reached for a crust of bread, he died before he could get it. The concentration camps started as work camps, but soon turned into killing factories. Thousands of Jews were daily forced onto trains that were usually used for transporting cattle and goods. And when they arrived, they were told to leave all their belongings and go to the showers for delousing. If one had not been picked fit for work, then gas instead of water came out of the shower nozzles. The Nazis killed 6 million Jews in this way. They were slick, they were efficient, and there was increasingly nowhere for the Jews to turn to. But sadly, all this is too familiar to you. So back to my story. Thousands of Polish Jews ran east, aiming at the one independent state on the Russian border in their last hope of escape. At their wits' end, thousands ended up in Lithuania. Well, you can see Poland, Lithuania, you can see that tiny little gap there. The Jews knew that this respite would not last long. No country was happy to have them. People were shot for helping Jews, and most preferred the reward money that they had for turning the Jews in. The Jewish community met up night and day, talking, tearing their hair out as to what they could do next, gnawing away at any option that might be open to them. In their efforts to escape Nazi-occupied Europe, Jews had applied to numerous countries for immigration, to embassy for places as far afield as Haiti, Puerto Rico, the USA, Australia, but each country required a visa, and each embassy shut their doors. Then finally, one man came up with the idea of Curacao. Curacao is an island in the South Caribbean in the West Indies. It is just off the coast of Venezuela in South America. What has an island in South America got to do with starving, filthy, spurned Jews in Europe, I hear you ask? Well, Curacao belonged to the Dutch. The Dutch were not in a pact with Hitler. There was no visa required to go to Curacao. Maybe everyone could simply take a train across Russia to a port, catch a boat, and go to Curacao. Unfortunately, you could not go across Russia without a visa. You could not board a boat without clear entry permission at the other end. You needed paperwork, you needed authorizations, and these had been denied so many times before. Again, the Jewish community rejected the idea and went back to the drawing board. The more they discussed their options, the more despondent they became. Nothing was going to save them from destruction. Then somebody came up with the idea of a transit visa. Jewish Dutch residents living in Lithuania approached their consul. His name was Jan Zwartendijk. If he could be persuaded to stamp your passport with Curacao, no visa required, and if you could somehow get a transit visa through, say, Japan, then you would have the required documents to board your train and travel across Russia. Then you would be authorized to catch a boat from the port of Vladivostok, and then you would be out of Europe. But how to get a transit visa? Japan was in a pact agreement with Hitler. So a delegation headed by a man called Zorach Warhaftig went to Sugihara and asked him if he could issue transit visas. This is Zorach. He was a young man at the time of my story, but later he became an MK, a member of the Knesset, and was one of the people to sign the Israeli Independent Declaration in 1948. Now remember, Sugihara had no problem with Jews. His only contact with them had been at Soliganor's house, where he had had a warm and pleasant evening. So he promised that he would write to his government to request permission to draft visas. He sent the following message to the Japanese embassy in Germany, the Japanese embassy in Latvia, and most importantly to his superior foreign ministry, Yasuko Matsuko, in Tokyo. I request permission to issue visas to hundreds of Jewish people who have come to the consulate here in Kaunas seeking transit visas. They are suffering extremely. As a fellow human being, I cannot refuse their request. Please permit me to issue visas to them. This request is a humanitarian plea. The refugees' request for visas should not be denied. With the noose tightening around the neck of European Jewry daily, the Ministry for Foreign Affairs in Japan took 3 agonizing weeks to reply to Sugihara's request. And when the answer arrived, it was no. Concerning transit visas requested previously, stop. Advise absolutely not to be issued to any traveller not holding firm end visa with guaranteed departure ex-Japan. Stop. No exceptions. Stop. No further inquiries expected. Stop. Kei Tanaka, Foreign Ministry, Tokyo. Sugihara immediately sent an even more urgent cable to his superiors in Japan, and then a third time, despite the sentence, no further inquiries expected, asking for permission to issue visas. It was an unequivocal no. But by now, the Jews of Europe were desperate. They had been to the Dutch embassy. They had a stamp in their passports saying, no visa required for Curaçao. It says it in French. A declaration to go to Curaçao, no visa required. But without the transit visa, it was useless. Without the transit visa, they could not even buy the first leg of the journey, the train ticket across Russia. The Jews were at a dead end once more. But word had spread, and one day on July the 27th, 1940, Sugihara looked out of his second-floor window and saw a quiet, orderly queue of Jews going all the way round his house and snaking down the street, all with their eyes turned to him. His 4-year-old son, Hiroki, looked out of the window with him. Daddy, what do all those people want? He asked his father. They want me to help them, his father replied. You are going to help them, Daddy, aren't you? The son said. But of course Sugihara's hands were tied, and with tears in his eyes, he turned to his son and said, Yes, I am. And with that, he went downstairs and told his secretary to open the door and let the first person in. Sugihara met with the first Jew in the queue and interviewed him. He asked his name, his age, whether on his own or with a family. He asked his country of origin, his country of destination, the port of entry, permit from the country, permit for the destination, source of funds for all the travel. He then wrote up a long handwritten document in beautiful Japanese calligraphy, stamped it with the official stamp, and finally he signed it. There's the calligraphy, transit visa, the stamp. He then logged the visa number issued and the name of the recipient. The whole procedure lasted 3 hours, and then he called the next one in. The queue around his house was growing longer. This is some of the list. Sugihara continued in this fashion for a few days, but he realized that he would never get through the queue, taking so long over each one. So he started writing shorter versions of the document. Then he received orders from his government in Japan. Stop issuing visas. We are in a pact agreement with Germany. We are allies of Germany. Close down the consulate. No more visas. Stop immediately. He received instructions from the Soviet government to close the office in the first week of August. Sugihara carried on interviewing. He appealed to the Soviet Union for an extension, while also negotiating with the Russian embassy in Kaunas to get permission for the Jews to pass through their country. Without this consent, even his visas would be useless. The Soviets agreed to issue transit permits. And that's the Russian one. They also doubled the cost of the train fare across Siberia and also the boat for Vladivostok, and also forced the refugees to spend 2 or 3 nights at either end at exorbitant cost. Sugihara's consulate was open from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. with closures at lunchtime. He started working through lunch. He opened his office early in the morning and stayed open till late at night. He promised every person in the queue a visa. He said, "I'll issue visas to each and every one of you to the last, so please wait patiently." He stopped taking interviews, long or short. He stopped numbering the visas. He stopped keeping a list and instead started stamping. His wife, Yukiko, stayed up with him half the night, massaging his cramped arm and shoulder so that he would have the strength to keep stamping and signing his name. She wanted to help more, but Sugihara didn't want her to be compromised when blame was to be apportioned, so all she could do was be by his side. Sugihara received cable after cable telling him to stop issuing visas. He received order after order telling him to close up the consulate, but he ignored them all and continued stamping and signing his name, putting aside his inbuilt discipline to authority, turning his back on his honorable servitude. He told his family, "I may have to disobey my government, but if I don't, I will be disobeying God." He continued listening to his conscience and continued issuing visas for almost a month. "How many people are left outside?" he would shout up to his wife. "There are still many," came the reply. He gave visas to individuals. He gave visas for families to use together. He even managed to give visas to 300 scholars of the Mir Yeshiva, the only yeshiva to escape intact. Eventually, he could ignore the authorities no longer. The Soviets wanted him out, and the Japanese were furious. On August the 28th, 1940, 1 month after the first visa was issued, and 3 weeks after the Soviets had ordered him to close down, Sugihara realized that he could resist no longer. And on receiving a telegram that read, "Lithuania is occupied by the Soviet Union. It is no longer an independent country," he knew that he had to leave. He burned all his confidential documents before the Soviets could confiscate them, but he continued stamping those visas until the door of the consulate was locked up. He was moved to the Hotel Metropole for 3 nights, with the end of the queue following him. He put up a notice on the closed gates of the consulate directing people to the hotel, where he continued issuing visas from the hotel lobby. When the physical visa forms ran out, he issued permission slips instead. When the officials came to force him and his family to leave Lithuania, he bowed deeply to the crowd and said, "Please forgive me. I cannot write any more. I wish you the best." Yehoshua Nishri, who later became a diplomat for the Israeli Foreign Ministry, was at the train station as the Sugihara family were forced onto the train, and he shouted, "Sugihara, we will never forget you." As the train pulled out of the station and people started to run alongside it, Sugihara threw out blank visas onto the platform, shouting, "Maybe these can still help you." In the end, he and his family were arrested and deported to an internment camp. Later, as a result of the harsh treatment they had had in the camp, his youngest weak son, Haruki, died. When they were finally released in 1947 and returned home to Japan, Sugihara was shunned by his neighbors, who saw his disobedience as dishonorable. He lost his job and lived the rest of his life in poverty and obscurity. No one wanted to be reminded of the incident in Lithuania. This is the route: Poland, Lithuania, across Russia, 2 weeks on the train, Vladivostok, get your boat, get out. It was not until 30 years later that one of the refugees found Sugihara again. Sugihara had always wondered whether anyone had escaped on his visas. Thinking that his name Chiune was too difficult for the Europeans to pronounce, he told them to call him by his nickname, Sempo. This led to confusion when survivors were looking for him, combined with the fact that no Japanese officials really wanted him to be found. In 1985, he was honored once again, not in Japan, but in Israel, as Yad Vashem recognized him as righteous among the nations. In 1998, Israel issued a commemorative stamp, and Lithuania has made his consulate and office into a museum called Sugihara House. In 2000, the Japanese themselves finally recognized him and built the Sugihara Memorial Hall in his hometown. 2020 was declared the year of Chiune Sugihara in Lithuania, and in just 2021, Israel named a square after him in Jerusalem. It is estimated that he saved 6,000 people, and their descendants are now 100,000. I actually knew someone who was fortunate enough to receive one of Sugihara's precious life-saving visas. He had stood in that queue of Jews. He had held his breath waiting to reach the front of that queue. He had had his passport stamped with the visa for life. His name was Julius Tigner, my daddy. You see, I too owe my life to Chiune Sugihara.
We had a session, I think last year, on Lithuanian Holocaust denial. How is that reconciled with honouring Chiune Sugihara in Lithuania nowadays?
Well, now I know they've made his consulate into a museum, and they're very proud of him. Because I worked with a Lithuanian girl, a Jewish Lithuanian girl. I said, have you heard of Sugihara? He said, we all know about Sugihara. We've all been taught about him. So that's all I know.
Can you tell us anything about any networking between people who are descended from those who receive visas?
I just know that his son has been really honoured in Israel. He was given free place in university. He studied there for free. He has been at the recipients. Obviously, Sugihara died in 85. My father got together with 5 other recipients and sent him 1 million yen. And just like Sugihara said, please accept this as from an uncle, we had to word a letter very carefully that he wouldn't be dishonoured in accepting the money from us, but we wanted him to take it. So we said, you are doing us an honour if you take it, and therefore he accepted it. And the people who have found him, I don't know whether they get together or not. I just want to show you, where's Daddy? That's Daddy's father, Daddy's mother. Where's my nice picture? That's him with his brother and sister who didn't survive the war. He was the only survivor from his family. That's him in the army, which he then went to. And that's him with me. So, proud last picture.
And do you network with any of the other people?
No. I only knew a couple of the Poles that he knew who have now passed on.
At what point did your father tell you his story?
He always told me, but he had many adventures. He left Poland on the 3rd of September 1939. As the Germans walked in, he walked out. He said he was one step ahead, and he had many exciting stories, and he's always repaid his debts. He asked an old woman who let him sleep on her floor for one night, can I pay you? And she said, no, but if anybody ever needs anything, you help them. And from then on, he never refused. But with Sugihara, he said, I am never going to be able to thank this man. Until in 1985, there was an article in the Times, and it was all about this man in Lithuania who'd given visas. And he was reading it, and he shouted to Mummy, his wife, and said, "I think this is my man." And then he got together with the other 5, and he always told his story. He always told us. We knew he was the sole survivor of his family. He always mourned his brother and sister more than his parents, always looked for them, always wondered whether they'd survived. And he told us, "I always knew. I don't remember a time." Always told us.
What was the mixture of the populations that came through? Was it purely Poles, or were the Lithuanian Jews?
It had to be only Poles. There was that loophole with the stamp and the Curacao, and Soligano, the little Lithuanian boy, could not get that visa. It was something to do with when Russia invaded, they became Russians, and they couldn't get that visa anymore. Otherwise, they'd be sent to the gulags. And Soli went into a dreadful concentration camp. He had a really bad time. And Sugihara kept saying to his father, "Hurry up, get out, get out, get out." And he said, "Soon, soon, soon, I'm trying to sell my business." And he didn't. But he survived it.
Do we know if people in adjoining countries heard about this and came into Lithuania, say from Latvia or Poland, to try to get any visas?
Yes, but Latvia, no.
Latvia,
no, they couldn't. It was wrong. They didn't have that little loophole. And especially once Russia had invaded, that was it. So it was just, my father calls his story Etzba Elohim. I mean, it was just a tiny little, it was the finger of God, and if he wasn't there at that week, forget it. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank Gillian for her absorbing presentation. It's quite an astonishing story about an amazing, courageous man, and I hope that more people learn about Chiune Sugihara in the future.